All right, got lots of people joining very quickly here. This is great. Happy belated New Year to any of you who I haven't seen, which is most of you. All right, let's see. We've got everyone here. Yep, 37. This is officially, I think, the most people we've ever had on tasting call. We sold 50 or 48 kits of the pickups, and then we shipped 5 or 6 around the country. So if you have 2 people per pickup, we've got 100 or so people on the call, which is exciting. It's the biggest we've done so far, and we're excited about the wines we're going to taste today too. We'll just give a couple more minutes while everyone is joining here. Let's see. All right, we're up to 44. And I found out from someone recently that you guys can't see the list of attendees, which is a bummer. I thought you could. And I chatted with Zoom customer service, and they say it's just not a feature in the webinar. So they said they're considering adding it. So right now we can't see. We have 44 people on. I think for the next one we may do a little bit of a minute or two of everyone on at the same time, just so everyone can see all of the other people that are tasting. While we're getting settled here, so this will be a one-way broadcast, like usual. We'll do a webinar where I'm talking, and you guys can chat in questions and tasting notes. And we really hope you do, because it keeps it dynamic and interesting. And I can just talk for an hour straight, but it's more interesting if I'm talking about things that you're interested in too. And then we can share how we're enjoying the wines. So pull up your chat window. If you're on an iPad, the chat is the link is up at the top. If you're on a computer, it's down at the bottom. And change the to in your chat window from all panelists to all panelists and attendees. And then if you would, just as a test chat in the town or the city that you are tasting from. And then you can watch, everyone will. So you're welcome to do this through the chat and also through the Q&A if that's easier. All right, here we go. Newton, Somerville, Boston, Somerville, Newton, Charlestown, Waltham, Lexington, Belmont, Newtonville, Wellesley, Marshfield, Sudbury, Charlestown, Seattle. Yep, we got 2 out on the West Coast. Vermont, Walla Walla, Washington, 3 blocks away from Ansonia, so near and far. We got Boston, Hopkinton. Great, this is great. Connecticut, Washington, D.C. Yeah, there's Tom. Tom and Molly and Linnea and Paul are some of my very first customers when we started this business 10 years ago in Washington, D.C. So shout out to Tom and the crew. They've been following us for a long time. So it's good to see you guys, and glad you could join. We've got Wellesley and Boston, Lexington. Excellent. Okay, so I think we're just about all here, and I will get started. And a lot of you have done these before. There's a lot of frequent offenders on this list. And so welcome back. But for those of you who haven't, this is a very informal tasting. So I really hope that you'll raise your hands and or figuratively raise your hands. I suppose you can raise them on Zoom as well. But interrupt and ask questions and give tasting notes and thoughts as we're going. We're not going to have a Q&A at the end. So really, as something occurs to you, or as I gloss over something you want to hear more about, please just put your hand up and we'll talk about it then. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. There we go. Okay, so I think you should be looking at Ansonia Wines Perry Feast. If not, chat in and I will do something different. Great. Okay, so today's tasting is 5 red Burgundies. And red Burgundies, as many of you know, span from entry level all the way up to you have to mortgage your house to pay for a couple of them. So red Burgundy is a wide range, and so for this one we're focused on the kind of entry level range. They're not the bargain basement, but kind of middle of the road. Affordable, we call them red Burgundies, and affordable is a loaded term depending on on who's purchasing. It means something different to everyone, but these are wines that we think are excellent values for the money and are not stratospherically expensive. So we're going to be tasting 5 wines. They're all from Burgundy. On this map, Burgundy is this red region right here. There's a little bit of it up here in Chablis, but most of it is through here, starting at Dijon in the top and going all the way down to the bottom in the Beaujolais, and Lyon is the town right here. So it stretches basically north-south along this east-facing slope. Everything that we're going to be tasting today is from this smaller part of Burgundy here. It's from these 3 sub-regions. So there's the Côte de Nuit at the top, the Côte de Beaune in the middle, and the Côte Chalonnaise at the bottom. The top 2 of these, the Côte de Beaune and the Côte de Nuit, make up what's called the Côte d'Or, which is the heart of the wine growing region in Burgundy. And I should say, for those of you who haven't already done so, please pour your wine into your glasses, and you can start tasting and start, getting your own impressions of these wines. I'll proceed through them from 1 through 5, but these are all red Burgundies. They're all the same, almost all the same year. They're all the same basic weight and structure because they're the same grape. So you should feel free to go back and forth between them. They're kind of numbered 1 through 5, but really you could do this 5 through 1 and it wouldn't mess anything up. So please, taste at will and at your own pace. And I'll continue through 1 through 5, but really going back and forth is the whole point of this, to have 5 wines open at the same time so you can look at them right next to each other. So we're going to be starting in the Côte Chalonnaise, which is down here. So there's 1 wine from the Côte Chalonnaise, and then the next 4 are from the Côte d'Or. The first one here, number 2, is from the Côte de Beaune, and then 3, 4, and 5 are from the Côte de Nuit. And we'll be moving, so basically from south to north, and we'll be starting with the first wine, which is the Domaine des Vignes Givry 2018. And this wine is from the Côte Chalonnaise. The Côte Chalonnaise is an interesting region. It's definitely a secondary region in Burgundy to the Côte de Nuit and the Côte de Beaune. It doesn't have nearly the same cachet in the name, and the wines that they make there are traditionally not as highly respected as you get from the wines from the Côte d'Or. However, there's a couple factors that's changing that a little bit. One is astronomical demand for red Burgundy and Burgundy in general, really. As people are, more and more people are trying to get their hands on Burgundy, there's more interest in the parts of Burgundy that didn't used to have enough interest, because there's a very small amount of wine that comes out of this very famous part here, the Côte de Nuit and the Côte de Beaune. And so as the interest grows, people are kind of expanding down the map and outer to the further regions of the map, of the Burgundy map. And so there's a lot more interest in the Côte Chalonnaise than there used to be. And that is good for the growers there, obviously, because they're able to sell their wine more, they're able to invest more they're able to get a little more for the wine, they're able to invest more in their infrastructure and in how they're taking care of the wines. And so the quality of the wines is going up too. It's kind of a symbiotic relationship. And so the wines in the Côte Chalonnaise are getting better because of the interest in the wines in the Côte Chalonnaise. And then on top of that, the warmer summers that we've had over the last decade, and before that more gradually, but really over the last decade, they've had some remarkably hot summers and early growing seasons in France. That really has also contributed to people being more interested in the Côte Chalonnaise as well. Pinot Noir grown there has typically been a little bit more rustic in years without a lot of sun. It can be a little thin, a little light, a little high in acid. But in these recent big rich years with a lot of sun and a lot of heat, it's a lot easier to make wine that's a little more crowd pleasing in the Côte Chalonnaise than it has been in the recent past. So all those things are making the Côte Chalonnaise, I think, a really interesting region to watch. A case in point for all of those things is this guy right here, Gauthier Desvignes. He's the winemaker. He's a 3rd generation winemaker in Givry. And I should say Givry is one of the towns in the Côte Chalonnaise. It's one of the better known towns, along with Rouly and Mercurey, and then Montagny down here. These are kind of the most of the towns. There's a lot of wine that's made in the surrounding area as well, white and red. But Givry and Mercurey, and then to a secondary degree, Rouly and Montagny are kind of the main towns people focus on in the Côte Chalonnaise. So Gauthier has taken advantage of this new interest and these warm summers and really started to turn up the quality of his wines. And the wine press has started to notice him as well. Their interest is extended into the Côte Chalonnaise as well. And so he's really, we think of him as kind of an up and coming real superstar from the Côte Chalonnaise. The wines of the Côte Chalonnaise are never going to match the complexity or the, finesse or just the kind of perfectness of wines from the famous regions in the Côte de Nuit, like Vosne Romanée or Gevrey-Chambertin or Chambord. But they're getting a lot better at the kind of level that they're operating at. So this is his village level Givry, 2018. As I said, it's 100% Pinot Noir. Gautier took over about 4 years ago, and he's completely redone the whole their cave. He's built a new cave. He's kind of dialed back the intervention in the vines. He's replanted a number of plots that he wanted to have a different type of Pinot Noir in. He's really brought a whole bunch of energy to the wine, or to the domaine. And he's interesting because he's very reluctant to kind of criticize his father and grandfather and how they made the wine. It wasn't nearly as good as the wine that he's making. But he always says, that's what Givry was. It was wine that wasn't particularly fancy. It wasn't something you could, lay down for a while. And it was wine that was, it was Givry. It was what people expected from Givry. And so there wasn't any reason to pour all of this energy into really fine tuning the product. Now, because you can, and because people are interested in, he's arrived at the right moment. This is one of his plots. He has quite old vines because his father and grandfather planted them quite a while ago. So he benefits from having old vines. Old vines produce less yield, but higher quality. So he makes a couple of other Premier Crus, but the one we're tasting today is the village level. As you can see in the nose, there's a lot of really nice cherries and roses. It's floral. There's not a lot of oak. In fact, I don't think he uses any new oak for this cuvee. You can see here, this is his barrel room. He uses oak for, all the wines are aged in oak, but not very much in new oak. So new oak is when the first year that you use a barrel, it's considered new. And it imparts a lot of oak flavor, a lot of that kind of vanilla spice flavor. Every subsequent year that you use it, it imparts a little less of that, but it still helps the wine mature before it's bottled. So people use second, third, fourth, fifth year barrels that have been used before to help the wine develop before it's bottled, but not really to impart a lot of toasty oak flavor. And we'll get into wines with a little bit more oak a little further on. Question, would you age this? Yeah, I think you could age this. And you can see in the mouth it has a lot of nice texture. There's kind of a punchiness. It's kind of a little bit of a rustic, kind of a charmingly rustic texture in the tannins. They're not harsh, but they're not soft either. They've got structure to them, and that's classic of Givry. And yes, to answer the question, I think you would age this. It certainly has the right amount of acidity and tannin to go a couple years. 2018, as I was saying, was a very, very hot year. And so it's a little bit up in the air, wines at this level, how they will age, because there's a lot of young fruit and it's very intense ripe fruit because it was so warm. So it's possible that you'll see these wines in 10 years will have lost a lot of their fruit just because they have so much of it up front. But at the higher levels, and I think some of these actually, you'll see that they probably will age really nicely over the medium term. All right, it's always easier to compare. If anyone has any tasting notes on this, please shout them out. But I'm going to move on to wine 2 so we can go back and forth between 1 and 2. So wine 2, and if you smell it, just right off the bat, this is a totally different nose. It's not actually that far from Givry. So wine 2 is from Marange, and Marange is the very last town in the Côte de Beaune. So we've moved up into this middle of these 3 regions here, or these 3 sub-regions here. And Côte de Beaune is named for Beaune, which is right here, the kind of the cultural center of this region. And the very southern end, where the Côte de Beaune meets the Côte Chalonnaise, right over here, is the town of Marange. So this is just over the border into the Côte de Beaune. And Marange is an interesting town. It traditionally was referred to as Le Médecin, which means the doctor. And that's because historically Marange would be when there was a year in Burgundy where there was not a lot of ripeness, which used to happen quite a bit more than it does now. It was cold and rainy and the grapes didn't ripen fully and the wines would come out very thin. People would blend illegally, I assume. Certainly now it was illegal.
I don't know if it was legal then, but I assume it was, would blend Marange into the wines from further north to kind of give them a little bit of hardiness, a little structure that they were lacking, or to doctor them. So that they refer to Marange as the médecin. In recent years, as summers have warmed again and interest has kind of blossomed in Marange, they have people have started to treat it as its own, not just a secondary act. People treat it as its own kind of its own wine in its own right. The winemaker here is Roger Bellon. And actually, I should just show you. So most of the Côte de Beaune faces east. And it's kind of an east-southeast, a little bit to the south, but mostly to the east. Marange is different. Marange is the last town right down here. And then you get to Santenay if you're going north, and then to Chassagne-Montrachet. And Marange, as the Côte turns here, Marange actually faces just about due south. So the wines in Marange have a ton of sun, which is part of why they were able to be used to bulk up thinner wines in the past. And so in Marange, there's rarely a question of getting enough ripeness because the wines, the slopes face basically due south. They get tons of sun all day long. And so they're wines that are usually very ripe and have full ripeness. This producer is Roger Bellon. Bellon is in Santenay, which is the next town up. And then there's Chassagne after that. But Bellon is in Santenay. He makes a bunch of wines from Santenay, but he also makes this wine from Marange. Let's see, we got a question about the Givry. I've had all three des Vignes Givry. Yes, I'll go back to that in a second. Yeah, so des Vignes also makes 3 or 4 now actually Premier Crus at different levels, and they add a little bit of complexity based on where they are. But I'll go back to that in a second. That's a good question. So this is Roger Bellon here. Is the guy on the left. The guy on the right, who you will see popping up in a lot of these photos, is my father Mark, who works with me, and I think he's on the call. Let's see, is Mark on the call? Mark might know. Yeah, there's Mark. Mark waves. This is Roger Bellon, and his style across all of his wines, he makes a bunch of white wines and a bunch of red wines. His style is quite different from des Vignes. It's it's much softer. He uses a very slow, very cool fermentation. So fermentation is an exothermic reaction and produces quite a bit of heat. And Bellon is very meticulous about keeping the tanks from heating up too much. So it takes him a long time for the fermentation to complete. But he uses these cooling sleeves and these cooling kind of things that go around the outside of the tank that slow the fermentation down. And what that does is it really preserves the fruit. And so his wines always have a really fresh fruit. 2018s everywhere have a lot of fresh fruit, but his wines in particular have a lot of fresh fruit. A question: how much is wine number 2? Yes. Oh, yeah. So I'll get to the end, and we have a question for the. I'll put up the prices right at the end because we like to do them without the prices, and then have people guess or compare what they like without the prices than with the prices. So you can see it's a much more floral nose than the des Vignes. There's a little bit more minerals to it too. But in the mouth, there's a very different tannic structure. It's much softer, it's much silkier, it's less extracted. There's a little bit less acidity than in the des Vignes too. I'd encourage you to go back and forth between these two though, because they're interesting and similar in some ways, but stylistically they're also quite different. Bellon, des Vignes also, I should say, uses all. He destems all of his grapes as they're going into the fermentation tank. So he ferments just berries, and Bellon leaves some of the stems in depending on the year. 2018, he left quite a bit of the stems in for all of his reds because the grapes themselves, the fruit was so ripe. He was worried that the wines would lack definition without it. So when you add stems into the fermentation tank and you let the wine ferment with the stems, you get a little bit of it just adds a little bit more tannin, a little bit more structure. You can see with his, because it's his style, it's never going to be super tannic, but there's more, it just gives it a little bit more definition, makes it a little less flabby. Yeah, it's funny, if you go back to the des Vignes, the fruits are almost more concentrated in the des Vignes. They're almost more kind of pointed, and they come with a little bit of a rougher delivery. The Bellon fruits are a little softer, a little wider, they're kind of prettier fruits, maybe. This again has no new oak. Spends about a year in oak barrels, but nothing new. So everything you're getting here, is basically from the fruit. Yeah, it's Bellon. The number 2 is kind of softer, a little more laid back. It maybe covers more width, but more kind of slowly. All right, great. I'm interested to see what people think of these. If anyone has tasting notes, please text them in, or I should say. I have a poll for you. So before we get to that one, let's see, stop sharing, and I'll go to a poll. So just an up or down vote, 1 or 2. Which of these 2 did you prefer? And again, I say this all the time. I wish you could see this live as a horse race thing, because it's really fun to watch the little bars go across the screen. While we're waiting for these votes to come in, I will say that the Givry that Davigny has Premier Crus, one of which is a monopole. So his family owns the whole thing. That's the Clos du Vernois. And with his other cuvées, they have a little bit finer grain tannins, I guess I would say is the easiest way to put it. The tannins are a little bit closer together. They're a little bit more knit together. They have more complexity. There's more depth. He oaks them a little bit, so they have a little bit more kind of oak complexity too. They spend a little bit more time in wood before they're bottled too, so they have a little bit more duration to mature before they're bottled. The main thing I think you get with the Premier Crus is longevity. So his wines age quite well, and I think the one that we're tasting today will age nicely too. But the Premier Crus in particular, if you give them 3 years, certainly you could give them 5 or 6 years and they would still be very interesting. But 2 or 3 years, I think, will help those wines blossom into really, really interesting things. Okay, I'm going to end the poll and share it. We have a clear favorite, but not a landslide. We have the Morange, 30 votes for the Morange and 17 for the Givry. All right, so let's see. We've got number 1, bowl of cherries. Number 2, orange blossom. Oh, orange blossom. I like that note for that. Yeah, it's more perfumey. I know what you mean by that. Let's see. Very round and textural, broad palate. A little high tone in the nose. Number 2. Yeah, it's amazing because they're very simple. They're very close by, and they're very they're different styles. The same year. And actually, it's good that we're tasting all the same year here, because I think you'll see when we get to wine number 5, which is a different year. It's not a perfect comparison because we're tasting a different wine in a different year, but the year makes a large difference in Burgundy. Okay, so we're gonna move to wine 3. Let's see. Okay, everyone see wine number 3? Great. So we are moving north from the Côte de Beaune up to the Côte de Nuits. And in fact, we're moving to what's called the Haute Côte de Nuits. This is wine number 3 now. Wine number 3 is from Michel Gros, who I'll talk about in a second. But the Haute Côte de Nuits is this region here at the base of the Côte de Nuits. You can kind of see it on this map as well. It's this lighter green over here off to the west. And the Haute Côte de Nuits is very interesting. It's a region that is not nearly as kind of perfectly situated in terms of its terroir and its exposition and drainage and soil content and everything as the Côte de Nuits, which is where most of the famous red Burgundies come from. The Haute Côte de Nuits is stretches from about 10 minutes to 25 minutes to the west of the Côte de Nuits. And it's called an Haute Côte de Nuits because haute means high. So it's about 100 meters on average higher in elevation than the Côte de Nuits. And that's important for a couple reasons. One, it causes the harvest there is usually about a week later than in the Côte de Nuits. And what that does is it gives the winemakers time to let the grapes fully mature before they're being picked. Increasingly recently, there's a lot of struggle with the grapes being, the sugars inside the grapes being ripe and being, the level that you would want to harvest them at, but the skins on the outside not being as ripe because they've had heat, but not enough sun. And these really, really sunny summers have kind of collapsed the growing season and made it a little difficult to pick harvest times. In the Haute Côte de Nuits, usually you get about a week later. There is a lot, it's a little colder up there, and that's a good thing at the harvest and maybe a bad thing in the spring when it's more prone to frost. And so you end up with frost problems up there just because it is quite a bit higher, depending on the year and the pattern of when the bud comes out and when the frost is. But in general, the soils up there are similar. I'll show you a picture actually so this is kind of what it looks like. It's beautiful. It's kind of these rolling hills, and you can see it's a little bit on this map. It's kind of a patchwork. There aren't clumps of just vines. So they'll find like an east-facing plot, and then next to it, where it isn't quite as sunny, will be wheat. Will be some other kind of crop. It's a really lovely area. There's a lot fewer restrictions on what you can grow. You can only grow Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, but you can grow it in kind of you can call it different things. For instance, this cuvee is called Au Vallon, which is right here, and that's a name that Michel Gros, the winemaker, made up, which you can't do on the Côte de Nuits, in the regular Côte de Nuits. This is Michel in the Haute Côte de Nuits, and as you can see, the vines are also planted much higher and much farther apart than you get in the Côte de Nuits. And that's another thing you can't do in the Côte de Nuits that you can do in the Haute Côte de Nuits. Your yields go down because you don't have quite as much, the rows, you have much more space between the rows, but it's much easier for sanitary conditions. There's a lot more airflow and a lot more, it's just healthier to grow grapes like that. Yeah, so you can see there's plots of non-vines and plots of vines. It's a lovely area, and it produces wines that, particularly now, for decades, it's been a place that has produced, in good years, really good wines, and in bad years or in kind of off years, wines that struggled a little bit. Now, with warming summers and kind of everything getting a little bit riper, the Haute Côte has moved closer into where you want the average of a growing season to be. And so it's a place that Michel, the winemaker here, has invested in quite a bit over the last 40 years. And buying different plots and replanting and focusing a lot of effort. And it's really kind of paid off now that there's more demand for Burgundy, and that these summers that are kind of turning the Haute Côte into something that's a little bit more desirable. This is Gros here. I'll talk about the Haute Côte for just a second. So you can see again a different nose. It's kind of a classier nose. It's like almost a more sophisticated nose. It's definitely, I'm smelling a little bit of oak in it, or a little bit of toast in it from the oak. So that's adding a new note from the first two. But there's a little bit more refinement in this, in the nose at least. Au Vallon, I should say. So Gros now has 3 different wines that he creates from the Haute Côte de Nuits, 3 different cuvées. They were all blended into the same wine previously, but now he split them up into a regular Haute Côte de Nuits, which he blends from a couple different plots. The Fontaine Saint-Martin, which is a particularly favored plot where he grows white and red in the Haute Côte de Nuits, and then Au Vallon, which is this one. This is his newest cuvée, and you just started separating it out and making it on its own in 2016. And he did that because it's a south-facing plot, so it gets much more sun than the other spots. And so similar to Morange in a little bit, because it's facing south, it gets a lot more sun, and so the ripeness is a little more increased. We're back to 100% destemmed for this, so he's making the wines with just the berries, none of the stems. Gros does that across all of his cuvées. And so the average age of vines in this plot is 30 years old, which is young for the Côte d'Or, for Burgundy, or for kind of high-end Burgundy. But for the Haute Côte de Nuits, it's actually quite old. He first plot of this was planted in 78, and then he's kind of planted a little bit since then, in different plots and at different times. The average age is 30 years for this. A couple places he's replanted vineyards that were abandoned since the time of phylloxera, which is a root louse that devastated the French wine industry at the end of the 19th century. And a lot of vineyards that had previously been in production were abandoned. And so this was a vineyard that was abandoned, and then he replanted it in the 80s. And so it's only been in production recently for 30 years or so. There's a nice smoothness in this wine too. It's definitely young, but there's a kind of there's a silky, nice texture to it. Let's see, typical Michel Gros polish. Yeah, I think polish is a nice word for this. It has a nice, just kind of very complete. It's very put together, and nothing's really sticking out at weird angles. I've missed a bunch of comments here. Sorry. Earthy and chocolatey. Yeah, chocolatey. That's a good tasting note. Oak being more pronounced. Yep. 3 is typically grow tannins. Yep. Concrete after a summer rain shower. Tom, I gotta get you to write more of my tasting notes. That's great. White fruit and and a little white pepper almost. A little bit of peppery. Yeah, this is lovely today. And as always, I encourage you to go back and forth between the others. I think next to it's interesting. Next to the Bellon, they're kind of floral in different ways. I wish I had better flower recall, but I'm getting floral flowers from both of them, but kind of, I don't know, some kind of more perfumey flowers in the Bellon and more maybe dried flowers in the Gros. Someone who's a flower, maybe there's a flower expert that can text in what's going on here. Gros, I should mention, is this guy here on the ladder. He makes wines starting at Bourgogne, going all the way up to Grand Cru Clos Vougeot, and everything in between. He's in Vosne Romanée, which is kind of the mecca for red Burgundy, or arguably for red wine in the world. It's the town that creates the finest Pinot Noirs in the world. And there are, he makes wines from Vosne, from Chambol, Nuits Saint-Georges, now actually from Gevrey-Chambertin, which is exciting. We haven't tasted it yet, but that'll be in the next series that we get from him. He also just inherited some Richebourg, somehow, some weird French inheritance issue. I think maybe he inherits it this year or something. He works with his son, Pierre, who I don't think I have a picture of here. I think that's Pierre's shoulder over here on the right. But he is I think he's at least the 6th or 7th generation of the Gros family. There's lots of different Gros in Vosne Romanée. He's one family that was split. It was just one family, I think, 3 generations ago, or maybe 4. And now it's split into a lot of different ones. They all make very good wine. They all make slightly different wine, but all in the same area. And Gros style is like this. This is the same kind of polish, the same kind of just smoothness. The tannins are there, but they're kind of perfectly integrated with the fruit. And the toastiness that you get in this, which I think people were noticing, is definitely something that's typical of Gros wines. He has a custom toast for the inside of his barrels. When you first use a barrel, you toast the inside of it with a flame, with a fire, and you can decide. You can ask for, when you purchase the barrel, the amount of toast on the inside, and the more toast you put in, the more smoke notes or toasty notes you get, but the less oak, like vanilla oak flavor you get. So it's it's just an idea it's a choice of the winemaker how they're going to structure it. Okay, so moving not terribly far away to wine number 4. Let's see, creamy entry, tense middle, polished long, cumin and baking. Oh, cumin is good. Yeah. Yeah, creaminess. Yeah, the creamy texture, particularly next to the other 2, I think there's something. Bellon is soft. The number 2 is soft as well, but in maybe just kind of a more relaxed way. Gros is just like soft in like a patina way, in a softened way. Okay, wine number 4. So here we're moving back to the Côte de Nuit. Out of the Haute Côte de Nuit, out of the hills over here. So back to the main drag here. But we're actually moving to right at the border between the Côte de Nuit, which is this top half here, and the Côte de Beaune. And so right at the border here, there is a line, and there's no, I think there's a road sign, but you can't, you would, if you were walking, you wouldn't be able to tell when you walked from one into the other. Just the vineyards just flow right in. But the geology changes quite a bit. And actually, this producer, Ravo, makes wines from just below in the Côte de Beaune and just above the border in the Côte de Nuit, which is the one we're tasting now. And if you taste them next to each other, we have both of them. I didn't want to do two Ravos in the same tasting, but we have both of them. And if you taste them next to each other, it's just astonishing how different the two styles are. And really, you know, they drew the line exactly in the right place. So on this map, the regional level wines, which is what this is Côte de Nuit Village, are in this green, this kind of lighter green color. So the village wines are in the yellow. And so these will all be on the right or the east side going north of this RN74, which is the main highway or the main road that goes through the Côte d'Or. So most of the famous wines are going to be on the west side of the RN74, the road. And most of the towns, or I guess all the towns, are on the west side. To the east side, there's a flat, it's flatter. The exposition isn't quite as perfect, but the terroir there is still quite good. And so that's where this is coming from. So this is Vincent Ravo. This, I should say, in a very Burgundian twist, this domaine is called the Domaine Gaston and Pierre Ravo. And the winemaker is neither Gaston nor Pierre, although Gaston and Pierre are still alive, although not the ones it was named for. So this has been a Gaston, Pierre, and Vincent going back and forth, son to father for several generations. The current generation is this guy, Vincent. His father is Gaston and his brother is Pierre, but his brother and he had differing winemaking philosophies, and so split their domain about 5 years ago or so. So they have two different domains, and there's a Domaine Pierre Ravo just down the road from this one. But Vincent in the split got to keep the domain, the regular label. So he's still got the regular label. They make a bunch of white wines and a bunch of reds. I think they're 80% red, 20% white. And they make wines all the way from Bourgogne and regional like this through Village, Premier Cru, and Grand Cru. Their Grand Crus are on the hill of Courton, which I think I have a picture of here. This is the side of the hill of Courton. Let's see, do I have any more? Yeah, so this is the side of the hill of Courton. And as you can see on this slope, as you go further up the slope, the wines get more, the classification goes up. So this is village level wines down on the slope, on the kind of the base of the slope here. If you were looking behind where this picture was taken, you would have the regional level wines like this one. The village level wines are the next level up, which you can name after the village, like La Dois, which is where this wine comes from. Then you get Premier Cru, and then you get Grand Cru. Vincent's style is a very, I guess I would say a very kind of light touch. He doesn't look for a lot of extraction, doesn't look for a lot of intensity in the wines. They're wines that are maybe the wines that were stylish in Burgundy maybe 15 years ago, 20 years ago. They're a little higher in acid. They have a little bit more tannin, but not aggressive tannin. They're wines that, you know, in 3 or 4 years drink beautifully. They sometimes are a little hard to approach when they're super young. 2018, this vintage makes all of that irrelevant though, because there's a lot more ripeness in the grapes because it was such a warm season. So we found the 2018 is really easy to approach young. So there's kind of a darker fruit nose to this than the Gros. Maybe like berries, kind of briery berries. It's a little denser. And then the texture is quite different too. It's very fine. There's very kind of fine-grained, almost chalky texture, like a chalky, stony texture. Oh, number 4, a little chalky. Thank you. Yes, I agree with that. Let's see. Before we finish, can you suggest food pairings for each wine? Yeah. So with these wines, you kind of, I'll suggest a food pairing like I did in the email earlier this week for all of them. But I think shades of gray for the exact pairings. I can tell you what I would go through with all of them. But yeah, I'll do that. I'll do that at the end. Did anyone, by the way, did anyone make a Boeuf Bourguignon like I suggested in that email? I have one going in my oven right now, just out of curiosity. That's why I'm trying not to drink most of this so I can have some of it with my stew. Yeah, this is less kind of effusive and less, maybe less perfumey, I think, than 2 and 3. But there's a certain kind of nice kind of sleekness to this wine. And the texture is really nice. It's very, it's just very kind of, it's not big. And it's kind of, like I was saying with Bravo's style, is to create wines that aren't enormous and aren't kind of mouth-filling, a little more focused, a little more tense. It doesn't quite have the same polish as the Gros, but it has maybe a deeper complexion, kind of a darker complexion than the Gros did, I think. Let me go back to that. Number 4 is berry, bordering on citrus. Yeah. It's definitely a finer kind of more, yeah, definitely berries in there. Kind of like red currant berries almost. Yeah, that was almost like a mapley note in the Gros that's coming out a little bit like, I think it's probably from the toast. All right, interesting to try the Givry against 4. Yeah, that's a good comparison. Let's see. Oh, we have someone making Boeuf Bourguignon. Good. Hello, Dan and Peggy. Repeat the levels on the hillside. Yes. So, and these are the levels in Burgundy. I haven't really gone over the classification levels, mostly because we're tasting from, we're tasting in kind of the all around the same level, which is the regional level wine, except for 2 of them, the Givry and the Marange. But in the Côte de Beaune, the classification levels mean a little bit. They don't quite get you the same. There's not a one-to-one comparison with the South and the North, despite them using the same classification levels. So on this picture here, we were standing in a village level plot, and the town is called La Doie. So wine made from this plot right here would say La Doie on the label. When you get a little further away, I would imagine the border is probably where this road is here in the back, before the hill pitches up a little bit. I think at that point, if going up the slope a little bit more, it would turn to Premier Cru. And that's the second highest classification in Burgundy. On this map, the Premier Crus are in orange. The village is in yellow. The Premier Crus are in orange. And then Grand Cru, and this map, this is a little confusing because this map we're looking at here is the Côte de Nuit, but the rest of Ravo's vines and where that picture is taken are in the Côte de Beaune. So that picture is taken kind of right down here where this text is. But the Grand Crus, which you'll see up here, are in this deep red, and that's the highest. In Burgundy, Grand Cru is the top, both for white and for red. And Ravo produces red and white Grand Cru on this hill right here. And I think it would be right up in this area here. All right, so yeah, this is Vincent. I visited Vincent at the harvest in 2013. Which was a tricky harvest because it was cold and rainy, and they were having trouble. You know, it was a year when they had trouble getting enough ripeness. They haven't had a year that's at least caused them that much trouble since. So it's definitely a trend towards warmer years and at least easier on the harvest end. That causes a whole bunch of issues at the growing end and the bud break end, but that's the trend. This is Gaston, who's Pierre and Vincent's father. It's very, very confusing. Okay, before we move on to 5, if you would all take out your phones before I forget and take a picture of your tasting setup, just so I can see where you're tasting from. We'll be doing these a lot in the depot, again, I promise, someday in Newton. But we've decided this is really a nice way of doing this, and we're able to dive deeper into these wines than we would, if we were all crowded around that little table in the depot. Let me give you the number. I'm going to text the number to text in your picture. This is my cell number. So yeah, if you take any pictures of your tasting setup wherever you are or the people you're with, text it in. And I think we'll keep doing these, but someday, I promise, we'll get back to doing our tastings in the depot in Newton. But we have these wonderful people from Washington State and from Washington, D.C. and from Vermont joining us when they wouldn't otherwise be able to. So cheers to all of you guys. All right, let's see. So wine 5 is from the Domaine des Varois, which is a domain in Gevrey-Chambertin. And they, like most of these producers, produce Bourgogne, which is the regional level, this one, then village level, and then Premier Cru and Grand Cru. So they produce at all 4 levels. This wine is actually from it's from outside the town limits of Gevrey-Chambertin, which is why they can't call it Gevrey-Chambertin, but it's in the region, in the neighborhood of Gevrey-Chambertin. So it's right up here next to the town. The big thing to know about this wine also is that it's the first 2017 that we're tasting. So we've tasted 4 2018s, which is a very kind of, I would say atypical, except it's becoming more typical in Burgundy. It's a very hot year. Particularly next to 17, it's a much different year. And actually, if you even just take any two of these and look at them in the glass or look at the little bottles, the 17 just has a totally different color. It's much redder. It has another year in the bottle, so that changes a little bit. But mostly 17 was a year that didn't have nearly the richness and the sun and the ripeness that 2018 had. Yeah, and the nose you can see is a little less kind of that young, juicy fruit that you get with the 18s. Still a nice amount of fruit there, though, and a little bit of dry flower, like dry, almost herbal, something kind of savory flower in there. Interesting. So the second year, the extra year in the bottle, certainly it contributes to this, but 2017, the vintage as a whole, right off the bat, has drunk more like this than the 2018s. It's a much lower acidity year, much less extraction, much more kind of just easier to approach young. There's less intensity, less, the wines I think people think will not age particularly well. It won't be a wine that you have to drink immediately, particularly at the higher levels, but I think it's a wine that, because of the lower acidity and the lower tannin, is just way easier to approach young. The French call them restaurant wines, 2017s, because they're easy when people were going to restaurants. They were easy to sell in restaurants because the current vintage that comes out is usually what you find in French restaurants. And when you have a wine like 2017, the other thing about 2017 was that there was a ton of it. It was a very, very large crop. It was the first, what they call full crop, where everybody got, everything they wanted from the grapes in a long time, in like, I don't know, maybe since 2009 was the last big crop. So it's been a long time since they've had a big volume year with solid quality, not, exceptional right home about quality, but quality that is just fine. And they finally have, some wine to sell in their cellars in Burgundy. It's been a real issue that they haven't had enough wine. This is Gilbert Hamel, who is a Swiss guy who is making wine here for quite a while. We just learned actually that the domaine is about to change hands, and he is retiring. And another winemaker from either Vaughan or Chambol is taking over and is starting making the wine in 2019. So in another year we'll get a look at the new winemaker, new style. But the things we've read about him have been good, so we're optimistic. Gevrey is typically a big, rich, beefy wine when it's in the village level. So this is kind of a maybe a third string version of that because it's 2 levels below that. But you get that kind of nice dark. It's later in weight, but it's definitely has it's not bright. I guess I would say it's light and kind of easy and silkier. But there's a nice savoriness to it. It's perfume, but it's not like sweet perfume. Let's see, light body, simple, sweet, one tone, very drinkable. Yeah. And that, in a word, is what the 2017s have been like. Honestly, you can drink 2017 Grand Cru and it certainly won't be, you won't be realizing what you paid for it, because what you pay for when you buy Grand Cru is what happens when you age it for, mid to long term. But honestly, it's hard to turn down a glass of anything from 2017. They're just so easy to approach young. And this is definitely, I think, in that camp too. This is Gilbert here. He uses, he typically actually does a lot more extraction than these other producers. So you can see that the vintage is winning here more than his style. His style is to really kind of, soak the juice on the skins for quite a while. There's a lot of intensity, a lot of extraction. But in 2017, the fruit just kind of was what it was. And the vintage really, I think, is what we're all tasting here. Yeah, it's just pleasant. It's kind of a pleasantness to the wine. Jasmine tea. Oh, that's a good note. I like that. Yeah, maybe that's the herbal note I was getting. It's kind of a, yeah, it's like dry herbal, like a tea. Yeah. Okay.
All right, let's see. This is Gevrey. This is I don't have any pictures of his plot actually because he's never told us where it was. But this is his main plot in Gevrey Chambertin. Gevrey has a lot of clay in the soil, so there's usually a lot of intensity in the wines themselves. Okay, let me back out of here, and we'll do some more polling because in the survey that a lot of you answered, thank you for answering that, by the way, everyone loved the polling. A lot of people mentioned how much fun the polling was. So we'll do lots more polling. Okay, so between the final three, I kind of had to pick, usually there's an easier way to divide. So I just did the first two versus the last three. We'll do them all together later. But so among the last three, 3, 4, and 5, which do people prefer? All right, I've got a comment. Dangerous to say the 2017s won't age. That's what everyone said about the 1985s, which are delicious but won't last, but have lasted very well. Well, there you go. So drink them now, drink them later, drink them whenever. And again, as I said before, I really encourage people to go back and forth to the first two and really back all through these because they're very interesting. The after the 3, 4, and 5, 2 just seems like very soft and very like just very easy, very gulpable. Okay, we've got almost everyone's votes in. 90% of the vote in. Okay, that sounds good. And the poll there. So we've got a winner, but a decently close race between 3 and 5. So 3 is the Gros Haute Côte. 21 votes, 17 votes for the Varois Bourgogne, and 8 votes for the Ravo. Okay, let's do another poll. Hang on. Okay, so I think the next poll. Oh, okay. So this is, and actually, I encourage you when we do this poll to pour yourself a little bit more of the first of all of them, or just kind of if you can't remember them, pour them. So this is just 1 and 2 versus 3, 4, and 5, and I've divided these mostly geographically. Do you prefer the style of 1 and 2, the Givry and the Marange, or the style of 3, 4, and 5? And you know, it isn't a perfect dividing line between those two, but I had to pick somewhere to draw them with it before I tasted them because I put these together a while ago. The Gros keeps adding really cool notes too, doesn't it? All right. Okay, so we only have 68% of the vote in, but it's going to be a landslide for this one. Winners for this one are 3, 4, and 5. I think that is easy. Wine 2 is our favorite overall. Oh, good. I like to have people that are somewhat. I like it when it's not a complete shutout. It's funny. I think the Gros, the Gros for me, I was a little worried that it was going to be a little too. When I taste it in the context of the other wines from Gros, it's the sunniest and kind of the brightest and most kind of lots of energy, and I was worried it was gonna be a little too loud in this lineup. But I think in the context of the others, it really has a beautiful complexity in it. Big fan of the Givry, enjoyed them all. Oh, good. Okay, so we got fans all over the place. Okay, so now favorite overall. Sorry, you guys have been texting in the favorite overall. Here, let's vote for the favorite overall. 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Like the Marange the most, but in sort of a generic way, like the Côte de Nuit. Interesting. Yeah, it's funny to go between the Varois and then back to the Ravo or even the Givry. But the Varois is the tannin structure between vintages. This is why vintages really are important. The tannin structure of the Varois is just so different from the Ravo, and it's only a year later. I think it's very interesting. I should say yes, and in the interest of the different wines, so all of these producers produce different wines at different levels, and mostly these are their entry levels. So
Divina, the wine number 1, has 4 Premier Crus that are at a higher level. Bellon has reds that are from Santenay, from Pommard, from Volnay, all at a higher level. Gros has, lots of stuff at a higher level. Ravo too, from La Dois and from Alux Corton, and then some Grand Cru. And then Varrois has a lot of things from Gevrey. So in any of these styles, there is room to kind of trade up. These are kind of the affordable entry level, or affordable as we're calling them, entry level versions of these styles. But all of these winemakers make wines that have, that are a level or 2 or 3 up from this. Okay, so we'll end the poll. Favorite overall. The winner is the Gros, but not by a noticeable amount, but there's votes for all of them, which makes me happy. So we've got Morange next, the Ravo and number 4 and 5 are tied, and then the Givry in 5th place. So very cool. All right, let me share the one more poll, promise, last poll. So here are the prices for these. So you'll now be able to compare them with prices. Which of them, given the prices, you think is the best value? So that's a somewhat harder question, isn't it? Oh, we have a split ticket. Yeah, maybe I should figure out how to get you guys to vote from different. Maybe we can vote from different computers, so you can get 2 votes. We have a split ticket with 3 and 5. Interesting. All right. So slightly different than the best, than the favorite when you take the no fair double voting. Yeah, I know. When you take the price into account. But we do that at the end on purpose, just so people can get a look at the wines on their own and then determine the value based on that. Okay, so I'll share these results. Clear winner here is the Gros at 36. I agree. I think today at 36, the Gros is drinking really nicely. The Varrois being the only one over 40, I think that's true. I agree with that too. And I think the only one under 30, the Givry, is a nice value, when you compare the others. Okay, so I just have a couple other things to share on here. Someone on here is doing another Zoom at 5 with Franklin Barbecue. So I don't want to take any more time than we promised we would. And I may just have to try to figure out how to do that the next time they do that. Okay, so yeah, the next tasting we're doing is February 27th, and it's the Domaine Amiot, and we're doing a spotlight on the Domaine Amiot. So we're doing 4 different wines, and then the 5th one we're going to keep blind for everyone. And if we ship it to you, we'll put it in a paper bag or something, and we'll have to trust you. So we're going to do Meond 18, Charme 17, Rouchot 14. Those are all Moët Saint-Denis. And then Combat 15. That's Gevrey Chambertin. And then the last wine will be one of those 4 vineyards and one of those 4 vintages. But we'll guess live. And I'm going to be trying for an entire hour to not say which one it is. And we'll see how that goes. And then we have another one in March, and I'll send this all to you in an email. Another one in March that will be Côte d'Or white, so it'll be a little warmer maybe in March, the end of March. We'll do some white wines. And some of you, I think, have already signed up for that, which will be really fun. The other thing to mention is January Futures ends next Sunday. So if any of you are interested in, these are the winemakers in the Futures. Actually, and I should say, Varrois has a late bottling schedule. And so we always import, they're the last of the year that we import. And the 2018s, the vintage you tasted 1 through 4, for Varrois, wine number 5, are in the Futures for January. So if you liked the Varrois style, the 2018s of the Varrois wines are in January Futures, and they're really, really delicious. They're big, rich, essentially exactly what you would think. There's the Gevrey terroir plus this huge, rich, very sunny year. And they're lots of fun. And the Bourgogne itself, 2018, is in there. And I actually think in futures pricing, it's $3.50 a case. So it's more like, what is that, 29 something a bottle. So it's much less than the 42 that this is. Anyway, I think that was all. Let's see. So did I forget anything? I'm glad you guys were able to join. This was lots of fun. And thank you in particular for the people joining from, I mean, thank you for everyone, but thank you for people joining from far away. It's really fun to see people from all over the country, which is lots of fun. Great. Oh, food pairings. Yes, I promised food pairings. Beef bourguignon, I think, is the easiest thing to pair with these. For me, for meats, duck and game fowl in general is the perfect pairing for red Burgundy. Yeah, duck I think is it doesn't get better than that. And then for vegetarian or anything that's not meat based, mushrooms, because as Burgundy ages, mushrooms are kind of a note that comes out. I think mushrooms are a perfect. So mushroom risotto or mushroom anything that really, if you have real meaty, rich mushrooms, work beautifully with red Burgundy. Let's see. Good. Okay. Well, if there aren't any other questions, if you think of any, please email me. But this was lots of fun, and thank you all for joining. I really like doing these, and we're going to keep doing them. We're probably going to keep doing them even if we start opening up again, because it's really fun to just sit down and take some time and just do a full lineup of wines. And it's really informative for me, and I hope for you guys too, to be able to do 5 wines all at the same time, back and forth, because the trick with determining what you like and determining why you like it, most of it is just trying to remember what the wine tasted like yesterday versus today. And then, you had something to eat beforehand yesterday. So when you sit down and you have all these 5 wines at the same time, and you can just focus on them, you really dig down into what it is about the different wines that you like. So that's what I like to do. And I really hope you guys do too. So this was lots of fun, and we'll hope to see you at the next one, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.